appreciate it next year when we can really have hopefully our dinners and be in short and all that. Valerie, are your kids still with you? You're muted. You're muted.
My daughter is here and my son is in La Jolla with his girlfriend. So yeah, they're close.
Yeah, they're in the backyard.
Practically, right. I'm happy.
Yeah, I'm sure you are.
And my son will be moving to Maui next month with his girlfriend. Why not? If you got to quarantine somewhere.
That makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm going to start. Oh, here's somebody, Susan Ehrlich. And anyone, Barbara, Ryan, Nan, love to see you. I'd love to see your faces so I can, but I'm going to start with a blessing. Okay. Our blessing of the Kabbalists tell us this is one of the key blessings to bless study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. To be engaged or be.
Amen.
Amen. So I wanted to talk about the Torah portions that we read on Rosh HaShanah, which tomorrow, you know, we'll be reading. And most of the time, okay, so please mute yourself if you're going to have talking. I mean, background noise. I'd love to hear you. So at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, because most people only come for one day of Rosh Hashanah, and it used to be the Reform movement's, you know, celebration. Now we have two, and I hope you'll all come to second day because that's my special service, and it's completely different and really with different music, visuals, and we did it at Ermis Sunday. But anyway,
you know what?
They're wonderful.
What, Jan?
Do you know what time it starts?
10. They both start. Yeah, tomorrow at 10 and. Also, and the second one's going to be on Facebook. If you want to invite your friends or family, it'll be open to everyone. But anyway, the point is that traditionally you're supposed to read about the birth of Isaac, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac, the second day of Rosh Hashanah. But because of Wilshire Boulevard Temple having, you know, just a huge amount of people the first day, we read just the sacrifice of Isaac. And the second day for whoever comes, instead of reading that, we read the story of creation, which is very beautiful and has its own messages. However, when you read it in the way it's supposed to be read, the first day is the birth of this child and all the celebration and the complications in the family. And then the next day you read about how God says, all right, you waited all your life for this child, sacrifice him. We have a totally different view. And we sort of understand why the rabbis picked these two to have one day after the other. And so we know, we're going to read the text in a moment, but if we think about the first day is the birth of this beloved child, and it's so miraculous that Sarah laughs. And that's what Isaac means, laughter, because she said, how would a woman my age have a child? And it's such a miracle. And then the next day, God says, take this child and give him as an offering to me. What's the message, or what do you think the rabbis were trying to convey or make us feel or understand by juxtaposing these two halves of the story? And in the Torah, there's a lot of stuff in between. So you don't really look at it that way. Usually it's not like one happens after the other. A lot of things happen in between. And then it goes to this. So I'm asking you, why would you think the rabbis would pick these two for Rosh Hashanah? Just before we even get into the text, does anyone have any thoughts on that? Susan.
My thought, as you were saying, so this is thank you for bringing this to our attention. I just, you know, I've never seen those two together. And my first thought that popped into my mind was how fragile life is. And that even though Abraham was commissioned to kill his own son, which is also awful. I mean, it's horrible, but how much a gift, how really much a gift this is. You know, she laughed and they knew it was a gift, but your children can die. And, be aware of that. And then also don't sacrifice your child on the altar of anything.
Right. And it's like the first day is life, the second day is potential death. And actually, in the very next chapter, Sarah dies. And the rabbis or the Midrash says because she heard that her husband had taken her son up to be sacrificed. And some say she thought he was killed. Some say that Satan appeared and told her he was dead. But in any way, her anxiety, her horror, she died because that's so, okay. Helen, you'll take care of that. So
I know.
Call from law offices.
Helen,
Sorry.
okay.
Call from law offices.
We'll all hear the call.
Call from law offices.
Oh, God. Hello?
Can Dawn mute it?
Oh,
All right,
my
Helen,
God.
you gotta mute yourself or something. Okay.
I'm leaving. 1
right.
second.
Okay, she's moving.
Susan, you're muted.
That.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Good.
So now we're going to look at the text. It's in the chat. If you want to open the chat, it's actually in the chat. Maybe you can look at it side by side, or if you downloaded it, but it's actually, Genesis chapter 21 is the first part of it. And there's a little bit of Rashi that I included in the text also because it's interesting. And the Lord remembered Sarah as he had spoken, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. So they keep saying spoken, spoken, spoken. And we know in the previous chapter, an angel appeared. 3 angels came to visit Abraham, and they told him he would have a son. So it strikes me to say spoken so many times, they're kind of implying that God keeps his word. God's word, God kept his word, or God keeps his word. And if God makes a promise, it's going to happen. Though, we can argue that in contemporary times, that's what the Torah, I think, is trying to convey. Spoken, spoken, spoken. And also that God spoke to Abraham. And, they talk about, I don't know why they say Moses was the only prophet that God spoke to face, but God spoke to Abraham also. I guess not as much, but he definitely told him, Lech lecha, leave and come. And he promised him this child and made many covenants with him. So it's interesting. I'm not clear when I think about it, why at the very end of the Torah, it says, and Moses was the only prophet that God spoke to face. Maybe because he actually went up to the mountain and got the 10 commandments in the Torah. It's a different level of conversation or intimacy. And Abraham named his son, who had been born to him, whom Sarah had born to him, Isaac. Now, they don't talk about it here, but earlier when she left, we know that the word Isaac comes from Yitzchak, to laugh, so laughter. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. So this is where we get the whole Brit Milah from this paragraph, from right here, because before that, Abraham circumcised himself. He was 99, and Ishmael was 13, according to the rabbi. So we follow this 8 days old Brit. And isn't it amazing to think that this was written 3,000 years ago, took place, if you believe it, 4,000 years ago, and we're still doing this ancient ritual of circumcision. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son was born to him. Son Isaac was born to him. So that's Abraham's experience. And I think it's interesting that there's no emotion. We don't hear anything about how Abraham felt. Now, this wasn't his first son, because he already had Ishmael, as we know, but there's no description of how he felt. And I want to compare this to how Sarah felt. And Sarah said, God has made joy for me. Whoever hears will rejoice over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne a son to age. So so what's the difference in their two responses, would you say, between the women, the mother and the father? What would be the difference in their responses? And do you think it's important that they talk about Sarah's response for any reason? Knowing what's coming, because we do know what's coming.
Well, as you said, Sarah was one of joy, really ecstatic, particularly being that I'm thinking back that Hagar had a kid and she didn't. So it's a double pleasure. She's finally able to conceive it. I mean, it still sounds so miraculous to me. And birth is miraculous, even when you're young.
And it's miraculous if you're an older mother, if you're in your, or some women gave birth. I have a friend who gave birth at 46 and somebody 49, so, I mean, it's not 90, but here's an interesting thing. And this is a real deep Torah study in Midrash. She said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne a son into his old age. So right away, the rabbis say, why did she say children, not a child? Why children? Why the plural? And so Rashi says, why children in the plural? On the day of the feast, which would be, like the bris, the princesses brought their children with them and she nursed them. She nursed all the children in the region, for they were saying, Sarah did not give birth, but brought in a foundling from the street. So the Midrash says, the women said, there's no way this is her child. It's an orphan, it's a foundling, or it's really Hagar's. And so she said, okay, but you only can nurse if you've given birth, is the implication. So she nursed all these children. And another Midrash says that every child who took of Sarah's magical breast milk either became like a king or a sage or something. They had special talents later on in life, having been nursed by Sarah. So, and another Midrash I read says that God rebuilt her womb because it, shriveled basically, and he rebuilt her womb. And, there's all these, explanations, but I don't think we need to take this literally. I think we just need to take it metaphorically, that God can give blessings. When God makes a promise, God keeps it. But let's just speculate. Why do you think God, and I don't have an answer. This is an interesting question. Why do you think God waited for them to be so old to have a child? What could that be? What could that be? If we were like reading a piece of literature and we saw that there was a 100-year-old father and a 90-year-old mother, what could that possibly signify, do you think? Any opinions? There's no wrong answers. We're just thinking it through. What do you think it could signify?
Well, maybe you could be creative and productive and at an older age.
Okay, I like that. That's good. Any other ideas? Why do you think God waited so long? Yes, Merle.
You have more patience at an older age?
Some of us do, some of us don't. I do.
Some of us never, some of us, once we're anal, and that takes away all of that. But I'm just guessing, I don't know.
Yes, any other ideas about it? Why? Well, there's an accumulation of wisdom. And I think, I was thinking about this. There's something about Abraham and Sarah, according to the Midrash, have been nurturing and teaching and converting and living this life out there and starting this they established the the Jewish way first. They established the Hebrew way, the belief way. Abraham had made treaties now with kings. They had relationships. So they weren't just this poor family who had a child. By the time they had Isaac, it was like a prince, because they say all the princesses came. So they were at a level of royalty in the land. So maybe God was waiting for Isaac's birth to be significant, not just to Abraham and Sarah, but to those around them, to this. And also it demonstrates God's power to the Gentiles, that, look at this man who worships this invisible God, and look at the blessings, and now even a child in his old age. So perhaps it's some of that, but it's certainly curious. God made the promise when Abraham first came, and he was 75, and he made him wait 25 years to have a child. Yes, Ruth.
Isn't it a matter of faith as well, that if you have enough faith, something will happen? You've been putting out this into the atmosphere, into the air for so many years, and it paid off.
Yes.
It makes you have faith.
It makes you have faith, but God made this blessing about you'll have children, they'll be like the stars in the sky and the sand in the sea a while ago, and he never complained. There was never a complaint from Abraham well, Sarah obviously got impatient. This is again the difference between a woman and a man. She got impatient and said, okay, I give up. Take my servant and have a child with him. We need some heir. We need something. She didn't calculate that Hagar would then end up, sort of putting her down and lording it over her as being superior. But it seems like Sarah lost heart. Sarah seems more human in general as a character. Abraham seems kind of perfect and on the outside. Inside, in the family dynamic, he has a lot of problems. But she has more dimension, and we can identify with Sarah, I feel, more, because she laughs. She says, oh, that's ridiculous. She nurses everyone to prove it's her child. She gives up at some place in despair and says, let's just use my servant because it's not going to happen. So I find her very, very interesting character, complex. Okay.
Oh, and Susan, she also, just to add to your list, and I definitely agree with you, she sees her son, and there's dispute about it, being played with by Ishmael. So
we're about to read this. We're about to read this right now.
Okay, then I'll leave you alone.
No, and then you'll comment.
Yeah.
And Sarah, child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she bore to Abraham, making merry. Now in Hebrew, that's an interesting translation. It says mitzachek, which means to play, Now, and Sarah said to Abraham, drive out this handmaid and her son, for the son of this handmaid shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac. So what do you think she saw? Why do you think she saw the two of them playing? She said, okay, that's it. He's got to go. And the mother, they both got to go. And we have to feel, wonder about Sarah. I really like Sarah, but this particular section brings into a lot of question of what happens later at the Akedah. I mean, are they connected in some way? Which you don't realize unless you read them, because you sacrificed Hagar's son. Is your son now going to be sacrificed? Or you can see how it feels to understand what it means to see your son be on the verge of death because he was, dying of thirst, Ishmael, as we're going to read in a minute. However, what do you think she saw? What did she see? What speculate?
Well, you're giving Sarah a bad rap here, and I know a lot of people commentate.
I love her. I'm just saying,
when
we read it side by side.
Yes, I know you love her, but she's getting a bad rap with that, with Hagar. I see her as, well, first of all, I see the playing, there's something malign in it. So it could be sexual playing or whatever, or teasing or bullying. And Ishmael was 14 or older.
Yeah.
And
16. Yeah.
right. We know that he was 13 at one point, and after this. So he's bullying or lording it over a little kid. And one of the duties of a parent is to protect their child and to protect the environment, and even if you can, some of the people with whom they interact. And right now he's interacting with Ishmael. So she didn't say kill Ishmael. She said send him away, and send him away, of course, with his mother. You don't send a kid away. So that is also another thing. Or nor do you, like the mother bird in the nest, send the kid away and have the mother without the kid. So she said send them away. She didn't say kill them or whatever. And Hagar, they say, was an Egyptian, maybe a princess, or because that has been said too.
Yes, it has.
It wasn't. It was cruel in the sense that Hagar and Ishmael had a lead, but on the other hand, she was asking that they go to some other place. So
Okay, so the Rashi says the word mitzachek, the only other place you see that word play is where you say Rebecca and Isaac, this is later, are sporting sexually. So there's Rashi says he was sexually molesting him or sexually playing with him. Another commentary says he was playing a game with Isaac where he'd say, okay, you run and I'm going to shoot an arrow and you catch it. And he was actually trying to kill Isaac. That's another thing. But what's interesting is that she said, this handmaid son shall not inherit with my son. So then there's another implication that at this feast, which was the weaning feast, Ishmael was playing with him and saying, yeah, but I'm still the oldest and I'm going to get double and you're going to be under me and I'm going to be in charge of you and all this stuff. But we don't know what Sarah saw. And then I want you to tell me what you think of this. The next line is, but the matter greatly displeased Abraham concerning his son. So there's two interpretations of that. The matter meaning send him away, or the matter that he was doing something wrong. Which matter displeased Abraham? What do you think? I mean, which one would you go with? That the matter was, oh my God, Ishmael is, molesting my son, or oh my God, you want me to kick out my older son, Ishmael. Which one do you think Abraham was responding to when it says it greatly displeased him? Just
they're not mutually exclusive. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. It could have been
okay. Both. Like you find out that your son is a molester and you sadly have to kick him out. You're upset about both. Okay. Now, this is really interesting. And this is something women should have this quote, in their pocket. God said to Abraham, be not displeased concerning the lad and concerning your handmaid. Whatever Sarah tells you, hearken to her voice. For Isaac will be called your seed. In other words, whatever your wife tells you, listen.
Yeah, right.
Your wife. So it says here, Sarah is telling you. So if we take this text, obviously God's saying, Sarah's right. Sarah is correct to send them away. And he says, Isaac will be your seed, but also the son of the handmaid I will make into a nation because he is your seed. So he says, I'll take care of him, but I have a big problem with what Abraham does. Now, Abraham arose early in the morning and he took bread and a leather pouch of water and he gave them to Hagar. He placed them on her shoulder and the child, and he sent her away and she went and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. He gives her, this is a king. He's basically a prince or a king. He's got flocks. He's got servants. He's got food. He's got gold. He's got silver. I mean, he socializes with the Canaanite kings. The princesses come to his other son's weaning, and he gives her a loaf of bread and a pouch of water. What do you, okay, Talia, I want your opinion on that.
Well, I feel that Hagar is meant to bear the shame of everything. That she's just she is being punished even though she didn't make the decisions, and that is another way of making her the one that it's almost like punishing her, yet she wasn't the one that made the decisions. And so they're thinking that, if they treat her that way, then maybe it could free them of their guilt.
That's interesting. By the way, the word Hagar in Hebrew means the stranger. Hagar, the stranger. So she's a stranger. Her name means she's a stranger, and he's very unloving to her. And his son, he's very unloving. He's very uncaring. He could have loaded them up. He could have given them a camel. He could have given them a donkey. He could have given them something to ride on, a tent, an umbrella, something against the sun. And that's all he gives them. And this, to me, he's like a helpless guy in human relationships. He's great on the large scale, on the macro scale. He's just inept. I find Abraham inept when it comes to personal relationships, or he didn't even think it through. I don't think it was intentional, but God said to do it. All right, here you go. And the water was depleted from the leather pouch, and she cast the child under one of the bushes. So then it says Hagar, they had no water. They were wandering around, and it says to her that she put, in Hebrew, here they call him a Yeled. Yeled means a child, a little boy. And then later they call him a Na'ar, which is a youth, which means more like a teenager. So, they refer to Ishmael, but if we think he was at least 16 years old, what do you mean she put him under a bush? Because she didn't want to watch him die, or she was putting him in shade. At least you'll die in the shade. We're going to die of thirst. Maybe he was just weak. He passed out, whatever, but she puts him under a bush, and she sits down from afar, and it says the distance of 2 bow shots. And she says, let me not see the child's death. And she sat down from afar, and she cried, and she raised her voice, and she lifted up her voice, it says, and cried. She wailed. And we've heard like those Middle Eastern women, when they wail, it's like, they're really crying, and her son is dying, and she's totally helpless. But then, what do you think this means? I don't know. I could find out, but I didn't research this. So she cries, and it says, and God heard the lad's voice. Not her. God heard the boy's voice, but we didn't hear him say anything. So what do you think he might have said? Why do you think God heard him and not Hagar? Let's speculate. What do you think that could mean? And God, Vayishma Elohim et kol hanar, and God heard the voice of the boy, of the lad, of the teen, a youth.
Maybe he cried out as well. Maybe he was witnessing it, so he felt something.
He was definitely, maybe he had a soft voice. Maybe his mother was wailing and he was talking softly. Maybe he was praying. Maybe he was asking God something quietly, or maybe he was comforting his mother. Saying, Mom, it's okay. Well, whatever. We don't really know, but something about Ishmael. And, Ishmael ends up being like a pretty good guy. Later on, Isaac and Ishmael get back together and bury Abraham together, and they make peace. Ishmael is, we don't learn a lot about him except for that playing thing, which could be something bad or not. We don't know. He's an interesting guy, and he's also considered, as we know, the father that, and a second Miriam, I'm going to call you, that the Arab people consider themselves descended from Abraham through Ishmael, and the Muslims. The Quran talks about the sacrifice of Ishmael is the story in the Quran, not Isaac. So he's revered by, a billion people in this world. Miriam.
That's such an interesting question, Susan. Why did God pay more attention to Ishmael? And I've heard this said before, so I'll repeat it. And it's a heavy thing. God heard the innocence of the young boy, and that appealed to him more. And then someone else in the discussion said, and that's why I say this is heavy what they said. Yes, God heard Ishmael's one voice, but why didn't he hear the million voices of 1 million children that were
During the Holocaust? Yeah.
By the Nazis in the Holocaust. And so, it kept everybody quiet. We were a small group discussing it. So this is the second time I've heard it brought up. Why did he hear? But when it's taught, the teachers who were teaching the Bible, I can only say this, and my teachers, they never brought up this profound concept. Why did God not pay as much attention to Hagar as he did to Ishmael? And you always do that, Susan. You always bring up such interesting, profound thoughts that would otherwise go unthought. So thank you.
Thank you. And then it goes to, and God heard the lad's voice, and an angel of God called to Hagar from the heaven and said, "What's troubling you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the lad's voice in the place where he is." It's such a weird combo. He hears the boy's voice. He talks to his mother and says, "God heard your son, so don't worry." It makes me think Ishmael must have said something very profound or very meaningful or very touching, that God would hear it, and then that the angel would say, "Don't worry, we heard your son, but not you." So,
But
I know, I don't know, spiritual or deep or something, I think. Yes, does somebody want to say something?
Oh,
I wanted to say that God, in fact, had promised that Ishmael would also be a leader of men. So he was concentrating more on this future leader rather than on the mother who, that's all I have to say.
The woman. Just another woman. Right. That's interesting, though, that, he had promised him to be the leader. But it's just that at this one point, it says she's crying. God hears his voice, says to Hagar, "Why are you afraid? God heard your son." What did he hear is and we don't know. And so we could speculate, what did he hear that was so, or maybe we don't know. I mean, it says a lot about the story, though, that it's written this way. And then they tell her, "Raise up, pick up your lad, grasp your hand upon him, for I shall make him into a great nation." And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the pouch with water and gave the lad to drink. So there was water there. And then some commentaries say the water was always there, but her eyes were not opened, that she just was so panicked and so hysterical or so, she didn't see that there was a well. And then when it says it opened her eyes, it's like suddenly she could see it, but it had been there the whole time. So that's another interpretation. And God was with the lad, and he grew up, and he dwelt in the desert, and he became an archer. So he became a bowman, a shooter, which is kind of a warrior and a hunter. He was a man of the desert, which the Bedouins are. And, it's kind of like the Bedouin culture started right here, it looks like. And he dwelt in the desert of Paran. So he lived a desert life. and his mother took from him a wife from the land of Egypt. And I love how this story and then the Akedah story ends up with the birth of Rebecca, that the story always ends with like hope in the next generation and life is going to go on. So that's how this is the first thing that we would read on the first day of Rosh HaShanah. Any comments or thoughts about this or reflections on this idea of the first day being about two women, two sons, each, concerned of her son in another way. Sarah never got to find her son a wife. Hagar actually ended up having a better life in a way than Sarah, because she lived and her son grew up and married, and we know he had many children and he was prosperous. Miriam.
What you're saying is a very major part of why God listened to Ishmael to preserve him, especially to be the leader of all the Arabs in future life. But another thought occurs to me before we leave Ishmael completely, which really I don't think will add to the understanding, but it just occurred to me, so I want to share it. Maybe Ishmael was protesting his mitzachek in Isaac. Maybe he was not mitzachek ito. Maybe there was no homosexual anything going on. Maybe it was Sarah's misinterpretation of their playing together. And today, it's a very bad thing to be a homosexual in an Arab country, because you may be imprisoned and put to death. I don't know if it exists in any other country, maybe in some more Muslim countries, maybe Sri Lanka and those other countries that are Muslim. But today you cannot be a Muslim and you cannot be a homosexual, an outed one, be walking on the street without thinking that perhaps you'll be imprisoned on the spot.
It's illegal in Russia too, actually.
Illegal in Russia?
But it's illegal, but it's illegal for poor people. It's not really people that have money. People that have money can do what they want and get away with it, and they can pay off the legal system, or they can make an exception for those people, or they can hide it better. I mean, it's just like
it's always been that way.
That have the power do whatever they want.
But it's not what I was talking about. That's true. But if you maybe have money, you can get away with everything and anything. But that's not what I was referring to. I was referring to the strong, extra fearful idea of being a homosexual in a Muslim Arab country.
And Ishmael may be saying to God, why did I do to deserve this? I didn't do anything wrong, is what Miriam's implying, is what he was saying. God, how are you abandoning me? Because Ishmael was also raised to believe in one God. And the Muslims do believe in one God. They call it Allah, which is not that far from Elohim or Adonai, but, and that's just the Arab language. But Ishmael would have been raised to be what we would call a Jew. They weren't Jews, but Hebrews or, Israelite. Hebrew at that point would have been the name, I think. So he would have also spoken to God, and God spoke to Hagar. And by the way, this is the first woman that God speaks to is Hagar. He doesn't speak to Sarah. When Sarah laughs, God says to Abraham, why is your wife laughing? He doesn't talk directly to Sarah, but he does talk to Hagar. So it's very interesting that, both women are flawed and complex. And that's what I like about them. They're not paper cut dolls with perfection, either one. They're not the Virgin Mary. They're not perfect. They are complex, flawed women, people. And it gives us permission to be flawed, to have our neuroses and our fears and our tears and our anger and whatever. And then, especially now tonight, Rosh HaShanah, to repair it. But it's not like our role models are perfect. they model humanity. So, okay, so now this.
Before we leave, may I make some of the things? Don't we read about Hannah also like on the second day?
Yes, it's the Haftorah.
What?
It's the Haftorah.
The Haftorah. Okay,
Yes.
but nonetheless, it's the Haftorah on the second day. It's also about a woman praying to have a child.
That's right.
So I think you've got 3 birth stories of women, and then also the creation. Okay, and then you have the creation, the birth of the world as well. So I think there may be some linkage there with birth and creation.
Yes, the world is born, and we are, and children are blessings, and children are born. However, we know that just because your child is a blessing doesn't mean they're going to have a charmed life, or you're going to have a charmed life, because Samuel had problems, which was Hannah's son, Ishmael, Isaac, and all had problems, and so did their sons, Jacob and Esau, and then Jacob's sons. So it's
and didn't Samuel have not so great sons too?
I don't think he had sons. That was Eli. The guy who raised him didn't have great sons. We don't really hear about Samuel's sons, do we?
Well, you hear something when Shmuel, wasn't it, has to give up the prophecy and go to Saul, that he didn't have such good sons. They were ne'er-do-wells and thieves and stuff. So he had no heirs in the prophet business.
Right. Okay, so now we have a little time to look at, because we don't usually read these back to back. We don't study them back to back, but now on Rosh Hashanah, we study them back to back. So here's all this happening. Now Abraham's home with his wife, with Isaac. Sometime afterward, we don't know how long, God put Abraham to the test, and he said to him, Abraham, and he answered, here I am. And he said, take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love. So now the rabbis say, how come he didn't just say, take Isaac? Why did he have to say, take your son, your favored son, Isaac, whom you love? Why all these adjectives or these phrases to constantly reinforce? So Rashi says, because he could say, take your son, well, I have 2 sons. Your favored one, well, I favor both of them. Isaac, whom you love, well, I also love Ishmael, you know what I mean? So they're saying that Abraham was trying to be evasive, possibly. And go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights, which I will point out to you. So early the next morning, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. Okay, not a word. And we've talked about this many times. It says Abraham was troubled. It upset him. What was the word? Wait, what's the word that I just read to you where it says, where is it? All right, I can't find it this second. Oh, it was displeased. The matter greatly displeased Abraham concerning his son, about Ishmael. Greatly displeased. Here, nothing. No emotion, no response, no nothing. So, what do you think? What's going on, do you think? He just does it.
Well, he listened to Sarah that time before. He was obeyed her. We talked about that. So he's a compliant guy.
But he had an emotion in the first one. It greatly displeased him, and God said, don't be upset. It's going to be okay. This time, we don't have any response to Abraham on an emotional level. And we do know, and this is nothing new because you're all Torah scholars with me, that when it came to destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, when God said, I'm destroying the city because they're bad, Abraham said, well, wait, what if there are 50 good people? Will you destroy it? Okay, no. What if there are 45 good people? What if there are 40? He bargains. Wait a minute, God, are you really going to do that? nothing. So I used to blame, I mean, always I've said, oh my God, he's what's wrong with him? But then I thought, what if he's so numb and shocked he can't even.
That's what I was going to say. He's traumatized. And yes, I mean, I always think that he argued for Sodom and Gomorrah. Those are other people over there. But just when you said that, I thought he's traumatized. And when Aaron's 2 sons were killed by the fire, he was silent.
Who, Moses was silent or Aaron was silent?
When Aaron's sons.
Aaron was silent.
Aaron was silent.
That's right.
He was traumatized by it. So that was my first thought when you said that. You know, the trauma, sometimes you can't speak and you can't.
It's like, yeah. So suddenly I thought, what if he's just horrified, traumatized, shocked? Miriam.
Going back to Abraham's emotions, we just left it, but I had something I wanted to share. My particular Chumash, which is the Hertz old Chumash, says, and the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight on account of his son. It doesn't say it was grievous. It doesn't say it was grievous. It says it was very grievous. So it shows how grievous Abraham was when he was asked to take his only son, and he gets up early, the same word that he uses here, Vayesh came baboker.
Where does it say it was grievous? It says grievous about Ishmael or about Isaac?
Grievous about that Sarah said to him, cast out this bondswoman and her son.
It's Isaac.
So he was grievous about Ishmael, but when it came to Isaac, we don't have any emotion.
It showed no emotion. But here, when it says cast out thy son, he was very grievous, not just grievous. It showed his feeling for Ishmael. How dare she say, cast out his son? How dare his son be cast out? And then God said, listen to her. There's so many nuances, yes.
Or the thing that was grievous to him was that he did something wrong. That's what the rabbis debate. What was grievous? Kicking out? He saw something.
Oh.
We don't know.
He also saw them at Tzachakim?
She told him.
Oh, so it's interesting because it leaves it very ambiguous.
Exactly.
It purposely does that. So he can be grievous about several things.
Exactly.
Having to do with Ishmael and Isaac also.
Yes. But here we're saying he doesn't say anything. And the next morning, he split the wood for the burnt offering and he set out for the place which God had told him. And on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. So they walked for 3 days and nothing, no conversation until now, just going 3 days. God is showing him this place. Why? And this when Sarah, said, where are they? And then she heard what happened. And this is what killed her, according to the Midrash. I mean, it's not in the text. Abraham said to his servants, you stay here with the ass. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship and we will return to you. So some people say he didn't want his servants to know what he was doing. So he left them behind. Some people say, oh, he's going to do something that's just for him and God. But others say that he was horrified or didn't want them to know or whatever. So he said, you stay here. And he says, worship. We're going to go and pray. Or we're going to do something holy. And we will return. But yet, what do you think of this? Because I just see this for the first time now. And we will return to you. We will return to you. Yes, Ruth.
I think he just didn't expect that it would happen, that he knew that something would intervene.
Okay, yeah. I mean, some people do that, say, but it's the first time I've ever looked and that hit me in the face. Abraham says, we're going up, we will worship and we will return to you, not I will return to you. So he didn't think it was going to happen, or he hoped it wasn't going to happen, or so this is just a pantomime. It's a charade. I mean, it's complex. And also it says God put Abraham to the test. And I always wonder, is Abraham putting God to the test? Thinking, are you really going to do this? Are you really going to do this? And then expect me to continue or whatever. I mean, I wrote a paper about it where I think God was waiting for Abraham to protest, and Abraham was waiting for God to stop him. You know what I mean? And it got to a point where it was like a chicken.
Yeah, right.
Gonna speak first.
Russian roulette.
Russian roulette or something. But I just, for the first time, saw that he said, we will come back. So, and Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac on his back. And he himself took the firestone and the knife, and they walked off together. And then Isaac said to his father, Abraham, Father. And he said, my son. And he said, here are the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will see to the sheep for his burnt offering, my son. And they walked together. So do we think Isaac had any idea what was happening, or was he just blithely going up the mountain? Do we have any sense of him? There's different arguments of what was his age. I mean, if you're going, it just says sometime later, but I don't know how the Orthodox have figured it out. They think he was in his 30s, which makes no sense to me. I think you can't see the Torah stories in chronologically literal order. And he has to have been a child, because child sacrifice was what was common in that ancient time. So the kid and dad are going up, and he says, I don't know what's Abraham thinking? I mean, this is such a traumatic story that it's even in the Torah. I actually read by one 14th century Italian commentator who said this never happened. It was a hallucination, because he couldn't accept it. He said, it never happened. It's impossible. It couldn't have happened, because God would never ask that. So this has troubled rabbis and scholars for hundreds of years. And they arrived at the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there. He laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. So, it's interesting. I was thinking about this. What's the name of this section called in Hebrew?
Akedah.
The Akedah, which means the binding. It doesn't call it the test. It doesn't call it the redemption. It doesn't call it the miracle. It calls it the binding. This binding is so traumatic that he bound his son like an animal and put him on an altar, that they call it that. I was thinking about that. And so Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. So do you think he was going to do it? Talia?
Yes, I think that, I don't know. I think there's just a bit of the, remember when we were watching the what was it called, 92, the LA riot movie? Yeah. And that whole idea of what humans are capable of, it's almost like a way to be brought to your knees of what we can do to each other, let alone our own child, and how that's what we have to work against, because unfortunately that willingness or that capability or that possibility exists in us.
I like that. That's very deep thinking. Yes, Merle.
I was also thinking when you said test, that we're all put to tests. And Abraham's obviously being put to a test. Does anyone really think that whatever has been projected to happen in this test is really going to happen? And that's part of, I don't remember who said it, but that's part of the trauma of it all. That you're told to do this and you wonder why you're told to do it. And then you set out to do it, and what's going to happen from there? Are you going to be any better from it if you do whatever this test is?
He passed the test. Could Abraham have said, no, I'm not doing it?
And I think that's part of his fear, the trauma is, what do you say? How do you?
What if you
Maybe-
say no? I mean, okay, I've asked
Well,
this.
that's the trauma part.
What would Sarah have said if God had
No.
Valerie?
No
Valerie,
way.
Sarah would have,
what
Sarah
you're
would have
shaking
said,
your head. Hold on, Valerie. Wait, you're muted.
If Sarah said no, she probably would have been punished. Yeah.
Would have been punished,
Yeah.
but would she have cared?
Oh, yeah.
I-
Oh, would she have cared? No. She would give her life for her child, I'm sure.
Right. I mean, if God had said, take to Sarah, take your son, she would have said,
No way.
to
Not
keep
over
it.
my dead.
she would
No
have said,
way. She would have said
she would-
no.
She would have said, you can take my life, but you can't take my child.
I
Exactly.
agree.
Exactly. So it's interesting that Abraham didn't even, I guess, consider saying no. Are we saying that he just said, okay, if I have to do it, I have to do it without any argument, or even if he's traumatized, he doesn't question, but you promised me that my seed would be, this multiply like the sand and the stars. What are you saying? Wait a minute. No. And then he picks up the knife. It's like, oh my God. And then the angel of the Lord called to him and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he answered, Hineni, here I am. Hineni in Hebrew always means I'm ready and willing. It doesn't just mean here I am. It means I'm ready and willing to obey. And he said, do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. Thank you a lot.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This has always been the most disturbing thing, obviously, I think, to a lot of us. So why is it in here and why do we do it on Rosh HaShanah? What are any lessons to be learned from it? I mean, one is God actually doesn't condone child sacrifice, which was practiced in those days. I mean, real child sacrifice. And then metaphorical child sacrificed the child in terms of his profession or whatever else. And then why isn't Isaac saying anything? He was old enough. I mean, you say he had to be a youth because he did child sacrifice. I think Rabbi Leader in one Rosh Hashanah said he was like an adult.
That's
one
what
interpretation.
Orthodox, if they're calculating like literal years, he would be an adult.
So why and I know one rabbi who said it's so awful he's not even reading it on Rosh Hashanah form. So why are we doing this?
Okay. All right. So let's hear what people say. Talia.
So you mentioned that it's not called the test, it's called the binding. So I don't know how much detail is given about how he gets Isaac bound and placed there, but that is probably not a easy time for either of them. And did Isaac ever forgive him? I don't know. He never forgave him. He cannot forgive him. It's
never
like
spoke again. They never spoke again.
So it's like whether it's action like that that's horrible, or whether it's words that you say that, it's like toothpaste, you can't put it back in the tube, that's undone. So that binding, just the process of taking it to that point of being willing to do it, was enough to ruin that relationship. So that's maybe why it's called the binding, because just getting to the point. So what if God says, yeah, don't do it. I was just testing you. But that it's the actions that the damage that happened from just being willing to do something that just wasn't morally right. I mean,
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Miriam.
Susan, you brought a new level of faith, the word faith, to us this morning by saying that as many times as you read this story, and myself included, V'nashuva aleichem, he says to his servants, stay here and I will come back. No, stay here and we will return.
Right.
Benashuvah, the idea of teshuvah. We use the word
Well, that's
teshuvah.
interesting. It's a similar word, Nashuva.
Exactly. It's the same shorish. It's the same root of teshuvah. And so return, repent. This had to be an utter, absolute faith on a level that many of us cannot achieve, nor should we strive to achieve it. Is it something we should try to achieve? I'm not sure. Because what made him say at the time that he was ready to raise the knife above his son Yitzchak to his servants, we will return. Even then, he had such faith in God that he knew God would not let him sacrifice him. And so you brought this new thought to me, because it's as though you read this for the first time when you said, "V'nashuva aleichem," we will return to you. We read it so many times and it never fully registered to me like now. I need to thank you for that new thought and that whole new concept, even though it's been written here in the Bible, those same words for these many, many years.
So going back to Susan's question of this is such a difficult story, that why do we read it on Rosh HaShanah? And we talked about, earlier that life is full of blessings and full of trauma and full of tragedies and whatever. And if you're Abraham, I guess, or if you're being from the Orthodox view, you have to continue to have faith through it all. The Kabbalists would say you have to find the good, you have to uncover the light or the spark in everything. And maybe for Abraham, he never really thought it would happen. In 21st century, we can't but help think about the trauma to Isaac and the horror that it inflicted on Isaac. And Isaac, we know they never spoke again. They didn't even go home to the same places. Abraham went one way and he went another. And when he was time to marry off Isaac, which we talk about his future wife is born in this parsha, he sends his servant, and the servant brings the bride to Isaac. Abraham doesn't. And Abraham ends up remarrying somebody else. So, he marries somebody else, that another person. But I think it's this idea that life is who will live and who will die, unatana toketh. You know what I mean? That's kind of on Rosh Hashanah. You don't know. You don't know what's written for you in the book of life. And this story sort of says even Abraham's son, for reasons we don't understand, can be taken from him, even though he's the most faithful. It's really hard for us. And I kind of like that as Jews in general. Some things are really hard. We have to keep looking at it and looking at it and looking at it. And maybe as we change, the story changes. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. As you get older, you may feel differently than when you're younger, but I don't know. I mean, part of the reason we read it is because of the ram and the shofar, that's in here, which we know that the ram that appears, and then we use the shofar, and that's connected to Rosh Hashanah. So that's one kind of surface. I find that a surface connection, but it is in there. Anyone else want to say something? I haven't heard from Nan at all. Yeah, Nan.
Hi, Susan.
Hi,
You are a treasure, I must say. I really appreciate. I love your teaching. I love your topics. I love your. You bring so much joy. I have two comments.
Yeah.
One is, if it had been the mother, or it should have been Abraham, who said, "Take me."
Right.
A mother would not even blink an eye. She'd say, "No, take me."
Right.
I hate to be sexist, but and the other thing is, one of the my problems with this, like Susan, with covering this on it all actually, is if I were to bring somebody who wasn't Jewish into the sanctuary for the service, I'd be so embarrassed. I'd be so uncomfortable you know, that we have a full house, and this is what we talk about, you know, that a father's willing to sacrifice his son.
Yeah,
I mean-
but the Christians love this story because it's a metaphor for Jesus.
Right.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Beautiful.
Right.
They
Absolutely.
totally understand it. They say the Lord sacrificed his only son for us, and Abraham, I mean, they have no problem with it. We are the ones who are going, are you, oh my God. And again, I've said, is Abraham testing God? Is God testing Abraham? Is Isaac testing Abraham? Is Isaac testing God? You know, to say, are you really going to kill me? I mean, it's so complicated in every way. And as Susan said, you're not supposed to sacrifice your children literally or emotionally or, you know, figuratively at all. You don't sacrifice your children for your glorification. So he looks like a faithful Jew. He should sacrifice his son? No. So some people feel Abraham failed the test. And what you learn from this is you don't go and obey blindly. And that's the message for a modern Jew, I think. It's you don't, and that God doesn't really want it anyway. Or God can't want it, or that's not the kind of God I want to be connected with. Okay, so let's just finish this. Okay, now that you've been willing to cut off your child, I bestow my blessing on you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of the heaven and the sands of the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes, and all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you have obeyed my command. So then it says, Abraham returned to his servants, and they departed for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. And where's Isaac? He didn't go. Isaac is not mentioned. And Abraham stayed in Beersheba. He didn't go home because that's not where they lived. And sometime later, Abraham was told, this is the end. And it's similar to the other one. Milcah has borne children to your brother Nahor. And they go through a whole list. And then Bethuel was the father of Rebekah. So we mention Rebecca at the very end of this, which is telling us again, like the wife of Ishmael, that the next generation and life goes on. And we end on this. We know there's going to be a wedding. So this is where we're going toward Rebecca, who questions God at every turn. She's my real heroine. She doesn't listen to God at all. She changes things. She asks him, why am I suffering? Why do I have to have these birth pains? What's going on? And God talks to Rebecca. God talks to Hagar, and he talks to Rebecca, not Isaac. So it's pretty interesting. So I leave you with these questions and these blessings, and a Shana Tova to everyone. I hope you all have your links for tonight. I hope you enjoy the services. Hope you'll join me on day 2 as well as day 1. So lots of love to everybody. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Susan.
Yes, Jody.
Our troubleshooters, we're all here at the temple. We are missing all of your faces. This was the best surprise to be able to see all of you.
I'm not socially distant.
Oh, we're not socially distant, but I'm so happy to see all your faces. We just ran a test. Everything looks amazing. So we're excited for you to watch services tonight.
Oh, is there, where would the schedule?
You've done.
Thank you.
Thank you for all you've done.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. Is there a schedule posted, like hourly?
Yes, it's on the website. The whole
Did you
schedule's
get
on the
your
website.
ticket, Valerie? Did you get like your ticket?
Yeah.
It has the
Also, it's in the bulletin, and also you can really go on anytime after 7 p.m. tonight. You can run it at any time you want. And tomorrow for tomorrow's services and Sunday services, anytime after 10 a.m. You could watch it at 2 p.m. if you wanted. There's no such thing as late to services this year.
Oh, so it's not real
Whatever
time.
time you come is whatever time you start it, and it will work.
Tell everybody about the shofar around the city. The shofar.
Yes, I heard that. When is it, Nan? It's tomorrow?
No, it's Sunday. I think at 3. Well, it starts at 3 o'clock, but there's a whole schedule because it goes. We're doing it at Wilshire. Ikar has something like 6 sites, and it goes all the way to the beach. And like every few minutes, another shofar from another.
Yes. And Talia, thank you for
destination.
the beautiful present. It looks amazing. I can't wait to taste it.
Oh, you are so welcome. Give Don your phone though, and give us. I want to see what you're wearing because
I want to see you. You say you lost 50 pounds?
I've lost 50 pounds.
Let's see,
Yes.
give
We see you.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, you want to see
Let's
my
see.
whole body? Here, I'll back up a little.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh, you look fabulous.
Mazel tov.
It's not 50 pounds since I've seen you. It's been 2 years of
it's
losing weight.
amazing though. It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
but you
That's
look
the best way to
fantastic.
do it.
Thank you. Well, Shana Tova, everybody.
Shana Tova.
Shana
Tova.
We miss you to bits.
Shana Tova.
Thank you,
Thank you
Susan.
again, Susan.
All right, bye, guys.
Shana Tova.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. But
Thank you.
second day will be great.